Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you here today, particularly our service men and women. Thank you for your service. It's great to have you with us. So I thought I would focus, first of all, I think it's terrific that you're doing this. This is, this issue, cyber, in my opinion, by almost any measure, should be the top economic priority of the state of Maryland. And I think the facts really bear out that case very persuasively. And I thought I would talk a little bit about how I think about the market, because I think it's pretty obvious that cyber is important. It's important for the government. We were unfortunately reminded of it recently with that terrible tragedy in terms of the disclosure of the personal data for 20 million current and former federal workers. But it's also really important for the private sector. And as I said, I think it should be our top economic priority here in the state. But for us to be successful as a state in executing against that opportunity, we really need three things. The first thing we need to do is make sure the federal government continues to make important investments in its cyber capability in Maryland. And I think the chances of that happening are actually very good. I think the federal government now finally has a wake-up call that it has to expand its investments in cyber beyond what it's doing in the Defense Department and to do it in other areas. And fortunately, Maryland has such singular assets as it relates to cyber capability. Here in Montgomery County, we have NIST, we have the NSA, we have the list goes on in terms of the unique capabilities that exist here in Maryland, which is one of the reasons why I think it should be our top economic priorities as a state, because I don't think any state can really bring to bear the unique capabilities that we have as a state. And while I'm not optimistic directionally that the federal government will make smart investments across the next 5 or 10 years, because our track record for doing that is not particularly good, particularly when you look at what's going on with the highway funding bill that we're fighting on, which is a whole other discussion. But I actually do think as it relates to cyber and the capabilities that are important for that, I think people really do get it. There's an intense focus on the Hill. I think the administration is very focused on it at this point. So I think we may see, despite the fact that federal spending as a percentage of our economy will likely decrease across the next 10 years, which is a threat to Maryland's economy, I do think we'll see federal spending on cyber growing, which is a potential offset to that threat on Maryland's economy, because it's really good. So the first thing we need is the federal government to really participate. Second thing you need is local leaders who really understand that this is a big opportunity and are doing all the things that you need to do to make sure to capitalize it. Fortunately, that's an easy kind of diagnosis, if you will, when you think about Montgomery County. People like Hans, people like Ike, we really have local elected officials who understand the importance of this economic opportunity for this region. So that part I'm really comfortable with. But then the final thing we need is we actually need leaders in the state who understand and appreciate that this is important and are actually taking tangible steps, not only as it relates to the infrastructure that's needed to make sure we're nurturing the business environment that's important to the state in general and to this industry in particular, but also I'd like to see a state that's more forward-leaning in thinking about incentives, tax incentives, and otherwise to make sure that this industry really gets located permanently on the map here in Maryland. And at this point, I'm not optimistic, or I'm not encouraged that we're doing enough in that regard. So if those three stakeholders come together, the federal government, the state government, the local elected officials, I think we can really take advantage of this opportunity. But it's important to think about this opportunity kind of on the macro, or kind of think about the dimension of the opportunity we have in front of us. So this is kind of the way I think about it, which is the global information technology business. In other words, the amount of money that private companies spend on information technology around the world is about a $3 trillion market. This is not government. This is just private enterprises in the United States and abroad are spending about $3 trillion on information technology. The rate of growth of information technology has been much higher than the rest of the economy. It's been averaging about 6, 7, 8% over a pretty sustained period of time. So it's reasonable to assume that'll continue. So if the global non-government, in other words, private information technology market continues to grow at the rate of growth it's had historically, in 10 years we will be looking at a global information technology market that's about $6 trillion in size. Most experts believe that based on the threats that exist and the rate of growth of those threats, right, which will be facilitated to some extent by a lot of the flexibility we're having in information technology. In other words, the move to mobile, the cloud, things like that, increase. They give us a lot of benefits, but they also increase the risk to cyber attacks and cyber intervention, and as Tony said, the bad guys, right? So most people believe that we ought to be spending about 10% of our information technology budgets on cybersecurity. So in other words, if you're running a huge bank, right, and you spend, you know, $5 billion a year on information technology or whatever the number may be, right, you should be spending $500 million a year on cyber, right? If you're running Target or Walmart, you should be spending 10% of your information technology budget on cyber. Universities should be spending, so that's what most people think you should spend. So that means if the information technology market grows the way we think it will, and it becomes a $6 trillion market in 10 years, that means all of those companies ought to be spending about $600 billion a year on cyber in all forms and fashions. Right now, in that $3 trillion information technology market, the companies collectively are spending about $60 billion on cyber. They're spending about 2%. So if the world plays out the way most experts think it will, and some of these numbers play out, I'm fairly confident the information technology market will grow from $3 trillion to $6 trillion. There's no reason to think that won't continue. And there's a lot of people in the room who have more expertise than me, and I see a lot of heads nodding. And will the private sector go from 2% cyber spend to 10% like they should? They may not quite get there, but directionally they're heading that way. But if they actually get there, if you think about it, that means the cyber market, and this I'm thinking about it purely as a business person for a second, not as an elected official, but in my old head as a business person. The cyber market is going to grow tenfold in 10 years. It's going to grow from a $60 billion market to a $600 billion market. Even if they don't get to 10% and they get to 8%, it'll grow eightfold. There's very few businesses that have any scale in the United States of America or anywhere that are going to grow tenfold over 10 years. I mean, that is an off-the-charts growth rate that makes investors and managers just salivate at the opportunities that exist. And so to me, that's a huge business opportunity for the state of Maryland, full stop. And if you think about all the states that would want this opportunity, because if I was given this speech in any state in this country, they'd say, yeah, we should be doing more of that. The difference is we come to this game with really unique advantages. First of all, we have a lot of capability already. I think in Montgomery County alone, we have 3,000 cyber jobs. We have 40 companies. As I said, the state of Maryland has these unique, I call them singular assets. NIST, NSA, go down the list. The federal government has been investing, right? And it's been investing here. It's been a really good return on the investment for the government, but it can even be a better return on investment for our region because we have the intellectual capital. We have the capability. So we're perfectly suited as a state to become the leader in cyber around the country and around the world. And unlike other markets, right, where you need presences on the ground and things like that to compete, right, or you need ports, or you need to be close to certain markets, or all that, none of that matters here, right? You can be located anywhere and be the global leader in cyber, definitionally, right? So that's the challenge that I want to make for the state of Maryland, to really make sure that we're in as good a position as possible to capitalize on this market opportunity. And the thing that you all know from business, if you have a high growth rate, right, there's almost no investment you can't make that doesn't make sense if it allows you to actually grow at that kind of rate, right? That's why companies that have such high growth rates are valued so high, right? Because the power of compounding is really quite powerful. I mean, Warren Buffett's been talking about this for 40 or 50 years. If you actually have a business that can grow at consistent kind of double-digit growth rates, I mean, that's pretty special. And this is an industry that has, you know, if I was just thinking about investing, this is a terrific, terrific industry to invest. So what do we have to do? As I said, we have to make sure the federal government continues to invest in Maryland, right? And the way to do that is to continue to make sure that these agencies are well equipped to handle investment. And that's where kind of local leaders and state leaders should come to the table, because if you want to expand NIST, if you want to expand NSA, if you want to have all this other stuff, you got to make sure the states are ready for business. You got to make sure the roads and transit systems are working. You got to do the basic stuff that's needed when people expand. And we want to make sure Maryland is as well positioned as possible to get that federal investment. Again, I think there's a good chance that happens. The second thing we have to do is make sure we have the local leaders who really get it and understand this is a priority, and start speaking the language and do things like this. And again, that's why I think Hans and Ike, we're so lucky to have local elected officials who really get this. And then the final thing is, I think we need an agenda at the state level to make cyber as big a priority as possible, right? And that involves kind of taking the regional competitiveness, which will always exist. Montgomery County, Howard County, Prince George's County wanted to get all these assets, and understanding that that's the dynamic, but we also need a statewide strategy, which could include incentives, tax breaks, other things to make sure we get these companies here. So that's my perspective on this issue. I think we come to this this kind of contest, if you will, with a lot of unique advantages, but we can't take them for granted. We have to make sure we're bringing our A game, because the facts that I laid out, I think a lot of people get and a lot of people understand. And it is really hard to find industries that are growing with this kind of rate. I mean, what's happening in the world with information technology and globalization is it's really putting tremendous headwinds on so many industries. It's putting tremendous headwinds on our economy in general, right? The fact that we have so much debt as a nation, and the fact that consumers have so much debt, the fact that we have an increased educational attainment in this country, right? The disruptive effects of technological innovation and global interconnection. All these things are creating headwinds on U.S. economic growth generally. And the state of Maryland in particular, which has been a state that has been incredibly reliant upon federal spending generally, about a third of our economy is tied to federal spending directly or indirectly. That's a really big headwind for us, because most people agree, no matter where you are on the ideological spectrum, that federal spending as a percentage of the economy will go down across the next 10 years. Fortunately, we won't have the wars that we've had in the past, and unfortunately, because of other undisciplined decisions we've made as a government, we're putting tremendous pressure on our discretionary spending budgets and our defense spending budgets. So those are big headwinds in general and for this region in particular. But there are some bright spots, and we have to have a laser-like focus on where there's growth opportunities. Life sciences is a big one, obviously. Information technology generally is a big one. I think trade is a big one. We have a port. We have a lot of other unique assets, which is why I was the only member of the Maryland delegation to support the trade bill, because I thought it was incredibly good for Maryland. But cyber might stand alone as the opportunity for this state and this region. And but to be successful, as I said, it's going to involve smart policy at the state level, and I think there's a lot more to do there. It's going to involve good elected local officials, and I said we've got those. It's going to involve the federal government continue to make an investment, which I think it will. And it's going to involve the community coming together, the business community, the nonprofit, talking about nonprofits. I mean, that's a terrific initiative, the business community. I mean, in my career, I've always had the view that when the private sector, the government, and the nonprofit community work well together, you get the best economic outcomes. And so what I like about today's event is you get that feeling that the government, the private sector, and the nonprofit community are coming together. They see this opportunity, and we're going to execute against it. Hopefully in 10 years, we'll have a cyber industry that's a lot bigger than it is now. But it was really nice for you to have me. I appreciate it, and I applaud what you do. Thank you very much.